So welcome to this video where I will go through my entire lens and camera collection. And I initially planned to do this video as a stream, but then I thought it would be pretty nice to be able to insert some sample photos from each lens as I talk about them, so I decided not to do it as a stream. And besides, you guys are usually very frustrated or irritated whenever I drink on camera, so then I'll be able to cut those parts out as well. So the reason I'm doing this video is because I have a lot of lenses and cameras right now, more than I've ever had, and I am planning to sell a lot of them to make room for new ones and to get money to buy new ones. So I thought it would be nice to go through the whole collection, talk a little bit about each lens and camera to kind of document my collection at this point. It's fun to look at in a few years or in many years. And I realized that this will be a very boring video for a lot of people. So if you're not interested in the thought of seeing me go through my whole lens and camera collection for like 1 or 2 hours or however long this will take, then just by all means please skip this video and come back for the next one. So let's get into it. First of all, before we talk about the lenses I have here in my cabinet, I actually have two that I haven't even unboxed yet. And this is how it very often is. I get lenses all the time, I order new lenses all the time to have new material for reviews and videos, and they often take a long time to arrive. If I order something from China, it could take weeks. So I always want to have like a steady stream of lenses coming to me, so that I always have something new to review and look at. And these are a couple of Russian/Soviet/Ukrainian lenses. One of them is the Volna 9, which is a Soviet, I think, macro lens. Will be interesting to try it. And the other is an Industar enlarger lens that you can actually use as a macro lens. And that is something I'm really excited to try. So these are lenses that will be in upcoming videos. So let's open the cabinet. And I think I will just go like from left to right, top to bottom. Feel free to jump around this video if you want to look for something specific. Here we have the Fujifilm X-T3 with a Laowa 65mm 2x macro lens on it. And this is a setup that I bought last spring, like a year ago, because I wanted a more lightweight and a bit smaller macro setup. I really like this camera, and this macro lens, the 65mm from Laowa, is I think without a doubt the best, or at least best value for money macro lens for APS-C. No, not only best value for money, I would actually say the best macro lens for APS-C mirrorless cameras, because it is the only lens for those cameras that goes to 2x magnification, and it is very, very good optically. Really excellent, and it is also very compact. So it's a very nice lens, the Laowa 65mm. I can warmly recommend it. The Fujifilm X-T3, it's a very good value for money APS-C camera. I like it a lot, even though I haven't used it as much as I anticipated. For some reason I've kind of gone back to my Sony A7 III as my main macro photography camera, and I'm not sure exactly why. I think it's maybe because I have used Sony A7 series cameras for so long, so that they feel more at home for me. I think the image quality with this camera is great, especially in macro photography. Perhaps the dynamic range is not quite as good as on the Sony A7 III, and maybe that is the reason why I use that camera more than this one. And by the way, the Sony A7 III is the camera that I am filming this video with. So let me show you, because it's a bit hard, but let me hang on here. Let me film the setup that I'm filming with, and this is what I film most of my indoors YouTube videos with. It's the Sony A7 III, which is kind of my main camera. I love that camera. It's good for video as well, that is why I use it for video. And then it's the Sigma 24-70 DN lens, which is a really excellent, like, all-round workhorse lens that I use for all kinds of video purposes. The zoom range is very practical, and it also has a very small minimum focusing distance, so I can use it for product shots of small things, and it's not really a problem. Let's show you something small, for example this SD card converter. As you can see, I can hold it up very close to the lens and it still focuses. Can I? Whoa, this is actually very impressive. Look how this is almost like a macro lens, I would say. So the Sigma 24-70 is an excellent lens, even though it's pretty big and heavy, but that doesn't matter for me because it's just a studio lens basically. Moving on. This is the Panasonic Lumix GM1, which is a camera I've had for a while now, and this is one of the smallest interchangeable lens cameras in the world. That is why I own it. It's nice to have a very small camera sometimes. And I actually also own the sibling of this camera, the GM5, which is just as small. The main difference between these cameras is that, as you can see, the GM5 has a viewfinder. The GM5 is that one with the viewfinder. Otherwise they are very similar, just as small, and they are unfortunately not made anymore or sold anymore new. So, or maybe if you're lucky you can find them new in some place, but in general they are not sold or made anymore. And they are 16 megapixels, and I think they take pretty nice photos. And sometimes it's very nice to actually leverage the Micro Four Thirds possibility to have a very compact setup. I think it's a shame that most Micro Four Thirds cameras are so big, so you could just as well use a full frame or an APS-C camera. With these you can really utilize the possibilities to have a very compact setup with Micro Four Thirds. So I love these cameras, and I will probably never sell them unless there comes some newer versions of them someday. You can probably get them for around $250, I think. And yeah, great cameras. Actually, the viewfinder though on the GM5 is not something I think is very good. This is the worst viewfinder I've ever used by far. It's really bad. You can check my video about this camera to see it for yourself. But at least it's a viewfinder, so in some cases it can actually be better than nothing. So let's put back the GM1 for now. And let's also talk a bit about the lens on the GM5 here. So this is the Laowa 50mm macro lens. I bought this and I own it because I think it's probably the best macro lens for the Micro Four Thirds system. Just like the 65mm and the 100mm Laowa lenses that have come in recent years, this one goes from infinity to 2x magnification, which is a lot of magnification on Micro Four Thirds because the sensor is so small, so you can get extremely close with this lens. That is why I love it so much and why I want to own it. And yeah, if you need a macro lens for Micro Four Thirds, I would say that the Laowa 50mm, this one, and the Olympus 60mm is the two you should look at. Both of them are great. The Olympus has autofocus, this one does not have autofocus, but this one goes to 2x magnification, while the Olympus only goes to 1x magnification. Here we have the Nikon D80. Pretty old camera that you can get very cheaply nowadays. I bought this camera to make a video about the cheapest possible macro setup that I could think of. And I made a video about that. It's called like the $50 macro setup or something like that. And yeah, I haven't used this camera since. I bought it for $50, I think. And I'm keeping it because it's good to have a Nikon camera sometimes when you want to try some Nikon lens. And this is actually the only Nikon camera I own. It is not very large resolution, I think it's like 10 megapixels, but yeah, it works. So I would probably keep it because it's not worth that much money, so there's not really any good point in selling it. Moving on to this beast. Have a look at this beauty. This is the Mamiya RB67 analog film camera with a custom Instax film back. And I made a video about this camera and this setup earlier, which you can go check out. Just search YouTube for like Mamiya and my name and you will find it. Yeah, this is a pretty legendary classic analog film camera. And it's very big and heavy, and it's not something that I like walking around with because it's so big and heavy, but I bought it because I wanted a nice way to take Instax photos that look good and that you can compose using a viewfinder with some kind of SLR camera, and this was the only solution that I could find at the time. These Fujifilm Instax backs, this one is based on Instax Square SQ6 camera, which is modified. I bought it off eBay. There are some guys that print 3D parts to modify these cameras to make them into a film back that you can attach to a Mamiya RB67 and a couple of other medium format film cameras. So it's a nice solution if you want to have high quality instant photos, but it's also pretty expensive. And what I'm thinking is I'm probably gonna sell this camera even though I like it, and instead buy the, I think it's called the RF70, which is more like a rangefinder Instax wide camera, because that one is a bit more compact when you fold it together, so you can take it with you to more places and doesn't weigh like 2 kilos or whatever this setup is weighing. So I might sell this, use that money to buy the RF70 Instax camera. Moving on, here we have the Lumix G80 or G85, I think it's called in Europe. For some reason they called it the G80 in the United States. And this camera, you see it has a bit of dust on it, and that is because I haven't used it in a long time. I should probably sell this one because I don't think I will ever use it again, because I have some other cameras that are better. But I bought this as one of my first like YouTube cameras to do indoor filming, which I'm now doing on my Sony A7 III. And this camera is pretty good video camera. It's really good value for money. It is pretty cheap these days if you can find it. I don't know if it's even sold anymore new. And the reason I prefer to use my Sony A7 III instead for video is because the Sony A7 III has very, very good autofocus for video. Things such as this is not that smooth with the Micro Four Thirds cameras, unfortunately. So that is why I love using the Sony A7 III for video, because it always gets the focus right and it does it quickly and accurately. Moving on, my favorite pocketable camera, the Ricoh GR III. As you can see, it's a very small camera, and this actually has an APS-C sized sensor, so it is a very powerful camera, and it has an excellent lens with a 28mm equivalent focal length. I love this camera, and I would probably never sell it unless it is to buy a newer version of it. I have a review video of it, you can go check it out, but this is an excellent travel and street photography camera, and owned the predecessor as well, the GR II, which is also a very good camera, but this one is slightly better and it has higher resolution, so I switched to this one. Now, unfortunately, there hasn't been that many opportunities to travel in the last year or so, but I still use this camera from time to time, even at home, just because sometimes you don't want to bring with you a big chunky camera. And this one you can just slide into your jeans pocket, and it produces a lot better photos than any smartphone because it has an APS-C sight sensor. So yeah, great camera, I love it. Yeah. And here we have this Sony, I was going to say, no, the Lumix G9, which is a very nice micro four thirds camera. I will talk about the lens in a moment. I really love this camera because the grip is so very nice. It's really perfect. I love this display at the top here, which yeah, my Sony cameras does not have this, but I think it's nice. And as I said, the ergonomics are excellent, and it has a very nice viewfinder, and it's just a very nice camera. The only thing I don't like about it is that it is a micro four thirds camera. I would want a camera like this, but full frame and with really good autofocus, which unfortunately the full frame Panasonic cameras do not have. That would be my dream camera. But yeah, otherwise I like it, and this is my main like micro four thirds camera, and I want to have it because whenever I review micro four thirds lenses, this is the camera I normally use. The lens on this camera is a very interesting one. It's the Mitakon 25mm f/0.95. I made a video about this lens. It is very small and compact, as you can see, but still it can produce incredible bokeh for a micro four thirds camera. Yeah, I like this lens a lot. The only thing I don't like about it is that it cannot focus properly to infinity. I need to get some kind of screwdriver so that I can maybe try to adjust it so that it could focus to infinity. And that would probably make me use it a lot more than I do now. But yeah, the Mitakon 25mm f/0.95, it's a very interesting lens which can produce some very beautiful portraits on micro four thirds. And this is obviously a completely manual lens. Yeah, but the Panasonic G9, solid micro four thirds camera. This should be one of the cameras you should look at if you're looking for a micro four thirds camera. It wasn't that expensive either when I bought it, and I think it has dropped a lot in price recently. Here we have another film camera. This is the Konica FC-1 with a 40mm f1.8 lens. And yeah, this is just a very cheap, very solid 35mm film camera. I use it from time to time because it's fun now and then to shoot a roll of 35mm film. And I wanted to get something very cheap that can still produce good photos, and this is exactly that. I don't remember exactly how much I paid for this, but it wasn't much. It was maybe $40 or something like that, I would guess. I like the 40mm focal length a lot because you can take nice portraits, but it is still wide enough to take some decent like environmental or landscape photos or like environmental portraits. Yeah, not much more to say about it. It's a solid choice if you want a SLR camera for 35mm film. Here we have the Sony A6000. And I bought this camera, I think I bought it to review APS-C Sony lenses, such as the Laowa 65mm when I reviewed that the first time. And I bought this one because it is very, very good value for money. It is very cheap and it still has a very good sensor with a good dynamic range, and that still holds true today. I recommended this camera in my video about very good value for money beginner setup for macro photography. Another benefit with this camera is that it is very lightweight. It is more lightweight than the newer Sony APS-C cameras because this one has a smaller, older battery and it does not have IBIS, and that is why it is so small and lightweight. Very solid choice. If you want to get a lot for your money, I can recommend this camera. One peculiar thing about it though, which makes me not like it as much as I could have, is that if you for some reason use very fast lenses on this camera, such as a f0.95 lens, it produces some kind of pattern on the sensor with some lines that you can see in a lot of circumstances, and it only seems to happen at like f0.95 and maybe possibly f1.2, but it is very distracting, and once you see it you can never unsee it, and yeah, I don't like that. I'm not sure if this happens on the other Sony APS-C cameras, but on this camera it does happen, so that is something which is a bit of a problem with this sensor. I guess it has to do with the fact that when you use a very wide aperture, light comes from a greater angle, and maybe that is something that this sensor cannot really handle that well. The photos still look okay, but if you increase the shadows or like modify the photo, you can easily see those lines and they are very distracting. Here we have medium format film camera, the Holga 120 CFN. Very crappy, very cheap medium format film camera for 120 film. I made a video about this camera in case you're interested. Yeah, it's basically a plastic toy camera with a plastic lens. The pictures most of the time look like garbage, but you can get some artistic and cool looking photos, especially since this one has like colored gels in the flash, so you can change color of the flash and you can do like double exposures and stuff like that. Yeah, if you're curious about this camera, go check out my video about it, but yeah, do know that this is mostly a toy. And here we have my Leica M8 with the Voigtländer 35mm f1.7 Ultron lens. I made a video about this setup. Just search my name and Leica on YouTube and you will find it. The main reason I bought this camera is that I wanted to try the experience of using a Leica digital camera. I was curious about it. And since the Leica digital cameras are so very expensive, I bought the cheapest one. This one is pretty old. It has, I think it's called like an APS age sensor, so it's slightly bigger than APS-C, I think, but it is smaller than full frame. Yeah, I don't really like the way the photos in this camera look. Your mileage may vary. Some people love the look of the photos from this camera, but I don't really like it that much. So I will most likely sell this camera. The lens is excellent. This is one of my favorite Leica M lenses, the Ultron 35mm f1.7. I own this lens twice actually. Not sure if I will sell this lens. Maybe I will buy some other Leica camera instead, or maybe I will just keep this lens and sometimes use it on my Sony cameras. But I really do love this lens. The bokeh is awesome, and the lens is also very good value for money. It's very cheap for being a very good Leica M lens. So yeah, check my video about the Leica M8 in case you want to know more about this camera. But I will probably sell it very soon. Here we have another chunky film camera. This is the Mamiya 645-1000S. And this was the first film camera I bought when I wanted to start exploring film cameras and analog photography. And the main reason I bought this camera is because I have always wanted to use the lens that I found for this camera. This is the Mamiya 80mm f1.9 lens, which produces some really awesome bokeh, and this is I think maybe my favorite medium format film camera lens of all time. I really love the look of the photos that you can take with this lens. And yeah, the camera, it's okay. It has a light meter, at least if you use this viewfinder with a light meter. But the worst thing with this camera is the ergonomics. It gets slightly better with this grip, but still it's unwieldy, and I don't really like the ergonomics of this camera. So I will most likely sell this camera very soon, but I'm not 100% sure if I will sell the lens. Maybe I will keep this lens, and maybe someday I will get a medium format digital camera like the Fujifilm GFX 50R or something, and then it would be very nice to use this lens on that camera. But yeah, it's a decent film camera, but I bought it mostly for this very nice lens. So let's talk a bit about the film cameras that I use for my outdoor YouTube videos. The first few videos I filmed with an iPhone, and that worked great. But when I'm out in the field, I often want to use my phone for other things, such as checking something or writing notes or whatever. So it's very nice to have a separate film camera. And when I'm out, I want to spend as much as possible of my energy and focus on taking photos and not as much on filming. And I'm always out by myself, and I need to film myself, so I want something that's very easy to use, so that I can just take out of my pocket quickly and press record and record a few seconds of video and then put it back in my pocket and not worry too much about it. But still, I of course want it to look as good as possible. So what I've used for most of my YouTube career, for most of my videos I made so far, is this camera. This is the Sony X3000. It's an action camera. It's similar to a GoPro camera, but the reason I have used this instead of a GoPro is that this one has optical image stabilization, so it can maintain a higher image quality while stabilizing the footage. And also it has screw mount here for a small tripod. I usually use a small GorillaPod. And also it has a very good microphone, which is a lot better than any GoPro camera. But over time I've not used that microphone that much, because I discovered that my style of making YouTube videos is to do a voiceover afterwards instead of talking to the camera in the field. That works better for me, and I like the result of it. So I haven't used this microphone that much, but it is a very nice microphone. But I don't use this camera anymore to record my videos. The last 6 months I instead used another Sony camera. This is the Sony RX0 Mark II. And as you can see, it is very compact. It is as small as a GoPro, and it is weather sealed, and you can basically use it in a swimming pool without a problem. Still though, what makes it different from a GoPro is that it has a very large sensor. This has a 1-inch sensor, which is incredibly large compared to a GoPro camera. So that means that you can get some nicer looking footage with this camera, and also you can use it in low light and it still works pretty well. So this camera is, I think, very underrated. Not a lot of people know about this camera or use it, but it can produce some very nice footage, and it is extremely compact. It has a few drawbacks though. For example, it cannot, in a good way at least, change focus while you're filming. So you kind of need to set the distance where you want to have it at, and then set the focus and start filming. And then you need to maintain that distance, because otherwise you will be out of focus. So that is a pretty annoying small thing, but I mean, you need to make some compromises if you're gonna make such a small camera that still has a very large sensor. And it's also nice with this flip screen, so you can, if you want to record yourself, you can easily do that. Like this. And then you can flip it down if you want to record something else. So yeah, I like this camera a lot. The thing though is that it has some pretty decent digital stabilization in it, but I wanted something more stabilized, and I actually tried to use a gimbal. I tried to use this one. This is the Feiyu Tech G6, I think it's called, or is it G5? G6. So it's made to use on action cameras, and it works with this camera, but unfortunately there is no like software integration that works. So I mean, the ideal thing would be if I would be able to press record here on the gimbal, and it would activate the camera, but that doesn't work unfortunately with this model of the Sony camera. So my experience with this gimbal and this camera has been kind of annoying. It hasn't worked that great. So unfortunately this is not a solution that has worked too well. So recently I decided to try another camera, and that is the DJI Pocket 2, which is a pretty new small camera, extremely small even. Looks like this, and as you can see it is very well stabilized, and it even has a small screen, and you can very easily film yourself if you want to. Yeah, it's a very neat little camera, and I've only just started using it, and I love it a lot already. It has a lot smaller sensor than the Sony RX02, RX0 Mark II, but it still produces very nice image quality, and above all it has a built-in gimbal, so it is very well stabilized. And also they have made the camera extremely easy to use, and the user interface is very nice. It's very easy to change settings, and yeah, I really love this camera. It's so nice to just put it in your pocket and then take it out, film a few seconds, and then put it back. The experience of using this camera is great. So I've just started using it. I just made one video with it so far, and I plan to use it to make many more videos, hopefully, until something even better comes along. Okay, we made it through the camera shelf. Now we just have some lenses to go through. Yeah, let's continue. So first we have a lens which is kind of in pieces right now. This is the Helios 44, what's it called? Trying to read this without, 44M-4. The reason it's in pieces is because I wanted to modify it, to reverse the front element. I still haven't gotten all the tools I need for this, so I'm waiting for those, and as soon as those arrive, I will modify it by reversing the front element to make some cool and interesting effects, and I plan to do a YouTube video about that later if I succeed in reversing the front element, so stay tuned. I made a video about that lens. I used it for macro photography. It's a very nice lens if you want to have that cool swirly bokeh effect for portraits, and it can also be used, as I did, as a macro lens if you use it on extension tubes. Yeah, it's a classic. Search for Helios 44 and you will find a lot of videos about it, including mine. Next up we have one of my all-time favorite lenses, the Samyang 35mm f1.4 autofocus lens. And I've also made a video about this lens, so you can check it out if you want to see more sample photos and more opinions about this lens from me. But I love the way the photos look with this lens, and I will probably never sell this lens. It's just an excellent 35mm lens for Sony FE. I really love it, and it is also excellent value for money. Not much more to say about it. I just love this lens. Next up we have another lens that I will probably never sell. This is the Samyang 135mm f2 manual focus lens. And this is by far the sharpest lens I own. This lens is mind-blowingly sharp. It's like you cannot really explain it to someone who hasn't seen sharpness on this level. You just have to experience it. And yeah, it's manual focus, so it's not good for like photographing children running around. At least it's kind of a challenge. But when you do nail focus with this lens, it is mind-blowing how sharp it is and how beautiful the bokeh is. Also, this lens can focus pretty closely, and not really a macro lens, but you can get some nice close-up shots of flowers, for example. Yeah, it's just pure joy to use this lens. Check my video about it. I use it now and then just to have a very enjoyable photography experience. Lovely lens, and also very good value for money, as often is with Samyang. Here we have the 7 Artisans 60mm macro lens. I have reviewed this in a video. This is a very good budget option if you have an APS-C mirrorless camera and want a cheap macro lens. It has decent image quality. It has a one-time magnification, so it's not, it doesn't get you as close as the Laowa lenses, but yeah, very good budget purchase. But I will probably sell this one because I have so many other macro lenses. So I will probably sell this one soon to make room for other lenses. Next up we have the Voigtländer 40mm f1.2 Ultron. And this is a lens that I haven't owned it that long, but I always wanted to own this lens. And the reason is that I love the 40mm focal length, which this one has. And I wanted a very fast 40mm lens, which isn't too big and heavy. And this is exactly that. It is very compact considering what it is. And also something pretty unique with it is that it has, even though it's completely manual focus and manual, it has electronic coupling and a chip. So you get EXIF data into your camera, and that is something very nice. I think that I hate that you don't get with most manual lenses. And also, since it has this, whenever you turn the focusing ring, it will automatically magnify the image in your camera in real time. So it's very easy to focus with this lens. What I found though is that this lens is far from perfect in image quality. They have made a lot of compromises in order to make this lens this compact. It has quite a bit of chromatic aberration, and it is not always super sharp. I haven't yet done a review video of this lens because I haven't had the chance to use it that much yet, and I will probably do a review sooner or later. But I also find it pretty likely that I will sell this lens after the review because yeah, I don't really love the experience of using it as much as I expected I would. So yeah. So here we have Laowa 60mm. Which is my most used macro lens in the past couple of years, and my favorite macro lens for full frame cameras. And yeah, I mean, I've used this lens so many times in so many videos, and I've taken so many of my favorite photos with it. It is a true workhorse. It goes from infinity to 2x magnification. Check my videos about it. It is sharp, it produces beautiful photos, and the reason I prefer to use this lens instead of the Laowa 100mm on my Sony full frame camera is that this lens is considerably smaller and more lightweight. Yeah, it doesn't bother me that much that you cannot use it for longer distances, such as landscapes, because then you get a lot of vignetting. Because I only use it for macro photography and like close-ups anyway. Yeah, I don't know what more to say. I love this lens, and it is my favorite macro lens, I think, for full frame cameras at least. Moving on to another macro lens that I really like and will probably never sell. That is this one, the Laowa 25mm. That goes from 2.5 to 5 times magnification. So this is the lens that I use when I want to get very, very close, when I want to photograph something very, very small. And it's great for that. I love that it is so small and lightweight and narrow. That it is so narrow makes it possible to take nice photos when something sits on a surface like this. And yeah, it's very good value for money. It's only like $400, and maybe something you should not buy as your first macro lens, but maybe as your second if you want to get closer. Warmly recommended. Then we have a lens that I have barely even used yet. Now it sits on an extension tube and a converter, but this is the Samyang fisheye lens. Let's see what the focal length here is. It's 12mm, and this is one of the best fisheye lenses you can get in terms of optical image quality. But it still isn't that expensive, and actually the brand name on this lens says Walimex or Walimex Pro, but that is just another name for Samyang. I don't know why, but they have so many different names in different markets. I think they have actually consolidated that now to only use Samyang, but at the time they made this lens it was still called Walimex. I think I bought it from Germany. Anyway, the reason I wanted to buy this lens was that, first of all, it's nice for a lens collector like me, or lens lover, it's nice to own at least one good fisheye lens if you want that effect sometime. But also I was very curious to do macro photography with a fisheye lens. So I actually put an extension tube here, but since the focal length is so very short, 12mm, even this extension tube is too long, so it actually makes it impossible to focus because the focus point is kind of inside the lens. So what I did was I ordered a helicoid adapter instead from Canon EF, as this lens is for Sony, so that I will be able to adjust the extension in smaller steps and hopefully be able to use this as a macro lens, as a fisheye macro lens. Yeah, I'll get back on that if I succeed, and then I will most likely make a video about the experience. But yeah, this is a solid option if you want a fisheye lens, the Samyang 12mm f2.8 fisheye. And here we have the Samyang 100mm macro lens. I just made a review of this lens and I'm about to send it back because I have borrowed it from Focus Nordic, who are distributors of Samyang lenses in the Nordics and I think in large part of Europe. Yeah, a solid macro lens. Check my review of it, even though I wouldn't really recommend it these days because the Laowa 100mm exists and that lens costs about as much but goes to 2 times magnification. But this is still a very good macro lens. Here we have something that I guess every lens lover should have at least one of, and this is a tilt shift lens. And this is actually an Arax or however you pronounce that lens, which is from a factory in Ukraine. And I bought this a pretty long time ago, like a couple of years ago, and I still haven't actually used it yet. I maybe briefly tested it, but I haven't really used it, so might make a video about it. The reason I bought this particular lens is that it was very cheap. Tilt shift lenses are usually extremely expensive, but this one wasn't that expensive, even though it's well built and seems to be of decent quality. So one day when I have the time and feel like it, I will try it out and maybe perhaps make a video about it. But I have some lenses like this one that I have kept for a long time, but I haven't used it because I haven't had the time or interest yet, but I still don't want to sell it because I want to try it a bit before I sell it. So then I feel like obliged to keep it until I've properly tried it. And this is such a lens. So who knows, maybe one day I will try it. This is a Micro Four Thirds lens. This is the Olympus 40 to 150 millimeter. And so this is like a telephoto zoom. I haven't used it that much. I used it in one video, I think, where I tried a close-up filter. But I would like to use this more, but for whatever reason I haven't had any good opportunities. I want to go out some morning and shoot some, maybe not birds, but some hares maybe out in the field. And this is one of the nicest telephoto lenses for Micro Four Thirds. The f2.8 maximum aperture makes for some very nice photos. So I would like to use this lens a bit more, but then I will probably sell it because I've owned it for like 2 years and barely used it at all. So it is maybe not a lens for me. But yeah, would like to try it some more before I sell it. Here we have one of the worst lenses I ever used. This is the Mitakon 80mm macro lens. And I actually had 2 versions of this lens. This is the very first one. You can see here that the production number is 16. And when I reviewed this lens, I discovered that it was very unsharp, and I informed Mitakon about this. And then after a while, they realized that I had made a complete miscalculation on the front element. So the second version of this lens actually had a front element that looked very different. But I got this lens free of charge from them. Yeah, I just want to keep this as an interesting memory. I will probably never sell it, and I doubt that anyone will want to buy it. But it's nice to have this as a memory because I don't think there are that many copies of this first version that was a complete failure. And yeah, it's just an interesting memory. And yeah, watch my reviews of the Mitakon 80mm or 85mm actually, I think it is. But I would not recommend anyone to get this lens, not even the fixed version, because it is not that fun to use. Here we have 135mm f2.8 lens. I think it's for Minolta. I'm not sure. And also I see that the aperture is broken. You cannot change it. Not sure why I even own this lens. I think it came with an analog Minolta camera that I have since sold. Not sure what I actually would ever use this lens for, since it's broken and since I don't own a Minolta camera anymore. Yeah, I should probably just throw it away or something, or maybe give it to someone who can fix it. But yeah, it's part of my collection now. Here we have the Samyang 35mm f2.8 for Sony FE. Very compact pancake lens for the Sony system, and very good. Not the fastest lens around, but if you want something, for example, for travel, use this a bit when I've traveled. It's a great lens, and it also doesn't weigh anything because it's made out of plastic, and also it is pretty cheap. So yeah, it's very good pancake lens if you want something very compact for your Sony camera. Here is one of the more recent additions to my collection. This is the Samyang 85mm f1.4 autofocus portrait lens. Really good 85mm portrait lens. Very good value for money, as often is with Samyang. I haven't actually used it that much because I often tend to use 135mm lenses instead, but sometimes you want a bit of a shorter focal length, and yeah, I love this lens. I haven't made a video about it yet, but I might do that someday. but very good option if you want a good all-round portrait lens. Moving on to the bottom shelf. Oh my god, I almost regret that I started making this video. It will be pretty long and my voice is starting to break. This is one of my all-time favorite lenses, the Canon 135mm f2. Beautiful, beautiful lens, which makes beautiful photos with a beautiful bokeh. And it isn't that expensive. It's made for DSLRs, so I have to use it with an adapter, as you can see here. My plan is actually to sell this lens and to instead buy the Sony G Master 135mm lens. That lens is very expensive, but the autofocus works a lot better, and I think it's better optically as well, a bit sharper maybe than this lens. And since I love the 135mm f2 focal length for portrait so much, I think it could actually be worth it for me to sell some other stuff and to invest some money in a really good 135mm Sony lens for my Sony cameras. Here we have the Holga lens that I made a video about. The video is called something like the worst lens in the world. And yeah, this one is probably not worth anything, but I guess I will try to sell it, because I am pretty sure that I will never ever want to use it again. You can check my video about it in case you're curious. Here we have the Lumix 12 to 32mm zoom lens for micro four thirds. So it pops out like this. So when it's not in use, it is extremely compact for what it is. So 12 to 32, that is an equivalent of 24 to 64. So this lens is actually pretty amazing, since it is so compact, still though it is very sharp and very versatile. I think I got this with the GM1. And it's a very good all-round lens for micro four thirds, very good travel lens. I used it a lot for filming when I used the micro four thirds cameras for filming my YouTube videos, and I will probably keep this lens since it is such a good all-round workhorse. Oh, here we have an old classic, the Canon EF 50mm f1.8. The nifty 50 for Canon EF. I actually don't own a Canon EF camera anymore, and this lens does not work that well on a Mitakon adapter, so I'm not sure why I still own it. I should probably sell it. But a great lens if you have a Canon DSLR and want a cheap and good portrait lens or all-round lens. Here we have a lens for my Mamiya 645. It's the 55mm f2.8. Unfortunately, this one is broken. I think yeah, exactly. The aperture doesn't change when it is supposed to. So I'm not sure if I should just throw it away or give it to someone, or I'm not sure what to do with this lens. Here we have the Samyang 45mm f1.8 for Sony. I love this lens. It is a super great, super small and compact, lightweight, all-round lens. 45mm is a pretty good focal length for both portraits and landscapes and many things. And 1.8 gives you a pretty nice blurred out background as well. I made a video about the lens, check it out in case you're interested. It's a great walk-around lens for Sony. Full frame. This might actually also come for other mounts as well, maybe Canon RF, I'm not sure. But yeah, as with most other Samyang autofocus lenses, it's great value for money. Here we have something that I am actually working on a review of right now. This is the 7 Artisans 50mm f1.05 for full frame. Yeah, it's a very interesting lens because it's not that expensive, and 1.05 is a very wide aperture, right? So you can get some pretty nice bokeh with this, some pretty blurred out backgrounds. It's well built, and yeah, in general I like this lens, but I haven't had time yet to review my photos taken with it. So yeah, you will have to check my review video of it for the final verdict. Here we have the most classic pancake for Micro Four Thirds, the 14mm f2.5. A very good lens, very compact, and yeah, I just like this lens a lot, and I will probably keep it as long as I have Micro Four Thirds cameras. I like it a lot. Here we have the 7 Artisans 35mm f1.2 for APS-C mirrorless cameras. I have owned this lens for quite a while, but I haven't yet made a video about it. It is a very flawed lens optically. It is far from perfect, but it can still produce some very nice photos, especially portraits. So it's kind of a fun, cheap lens, extremely small and compact, that can produce some very beautiful, interesting photos, but it is not something that you should use if you want to have photos that are always perfect and sharp corner to corner, because this lens is yeah, very flawed, but with a lot of character. Might make a video about it later, but yeah, that's all I can say for now. And here we have an old friend. Let me dust off some dust. This is the Minolta f1.7 55mm lens. I have owned it for a very long time, and I've used it in a lot of my videos, and I actually think I made a special video about this lens. I love this lens. Old manual focus lens from the 70s, but very cheap and very good value for money. And it produces a very soft and nice bokeh. It is great for portraits, for all-around photography. And it's also pretty great for macro photography if you reverse it or use it on extension tubes. A lens like this, I think it costs around $40. And yeah, it's just great. I love it a lot. It's a great all-round lens to adapt on your mirrorless camera. Here we have another Minolta lens. I think I got it with some Minolta camera that I don't own anymore. But you can of course adapt it to use on your mirrorless camera. It's 45mm f2. I used it a little bit, and I don't like the rendering as much as the 55mm f1.7, so I should probably sell it because I don't think I will use it that much more. But it's yeah, it's a pretty good lens if you want an all-round lens that is cheap. Here we have the Lumix 25mm for Micro Four Thirds f1.8, I think? No, f1.7. Good all-round, nifty 50 for Micro Four Thirds. Not something I use. I haven't used it in like years. Should probably sell it. Haven't gotten around to it yet. But yeah, it's a solid lens if you want something very cheap but that still can produce nice photos. Then we have another Canon EF lens, the Canon 40mm Pancake f2.8. This is actually the lens I used in my very first YouTube video, the one about the $230 macro setup. That video got very popular and kind of kicked off this whole YouTube channel and this whole career as a YouTuber for me. So I have some kind of sentimental value it has for me, and it's a very good lens in general. But I mean, I don't own any Canon DSLRs anymore. But I think I will maybe keep it either way because yeah, it has some sentimental value for me. Or is that the right word? Sentimental value? I don't know. Anyway, I think I will keep it because it's a good memory of the start of my whole YouTube career. And I think that was actually all of my lenses and cameras that I have in the cabinet here. I might have some lens or camera in other places in my apartment, but Most of the time I try to have them all in here to protect them from dust and to have an overview. Before we wrap up this video, I also want to show you a couple of my drones. So this is the DJI, what's it called? The Mavic Mini. The first version of the Mavic Mini. Now there is the Mini 2, which is a lot better. This one only has 2.7K video. Still though, it's a great drone and I like how compact it is, and the new version seems to be even better. But unfortunately I don't usually or that often have time or like a good opportunity to use drones, because I mostly walk around in areas close to where I live, and usually since I live in like an urban area there are a lot of people around and I don't want to disturb people by using drones too much. But when I'm out on the countryside and so on, then it's a good opportunity to use drones, and then I like to fly this one. And then, as you all know, I've been gotten into FPV drones lately, and I have a couple of them that I showed in a video earlier, and this is my latest one. I haven't had the time to use it that much yet. I only flown it like once, but I love it a lot. This is the BetaFPV 95X Mark III with this little naked GoPro-ish camera, the Insta360. I bought this setup because it was pretty cheap and I wanted something with a GoPro-like camera that I didn't have to solder or like strip down myself. I wanted something ready to fly because I don't like spending too much time on an effort on kind of building drones and stuff myself. And I love this one a lot. It wasn't too expensive. I ordered it from BetaFPV's homepage. Great fun to fly, and I hope that I will be able to use it a lot this summer. Yeah, FPV is a lot of fun. So guys, I think that's it for this video. My voice is completely starting to fail me, I think. And yeah, I just feel tired in my voice from talking about all these things. But I'm very happy I recorded this video, because now I have like a snapshot of my camera collection in May 2021 that I can have as a reference point and as a memory. Now I will go on to sell a lot of these lenses and cameras, or at least the ones I haven't used in a long time, to get some money to buy other fun things. Yeah, thank you for watching this video. If you watched all the way from the beginning to here, I am truly impressed, and thank you so much. Yeah, see you very soon again in another video. That's it for this video. Over and out. Bye bye.